Greetings, YouTube. This is Remarkable Republican here once again to bring you the truth with a truth-flavored bias. Today, we're taking a look at Yakuza 4, the sequel to Yakuza 3. This game takes up the commie and queer agenda to a 10. Or perhaps I should say to a 4, since now you have 4 playable characters, each one of which represents some different, yet very real, problems. So let's talk about the 4 degenerates who are the stars of this game. And we'll start with the order that you play them in, so let's take a look at Akiyama. When the game started, I was pretty surprised to not be playing as Kiryu. Kiryu is the main character in every game, and even in Yakuza 0 where there are 2 characters, it's pretty obvious that Kiryu is a bit more important than Majima. Yet, we start off as Akiyama. And at first, I was pretty amped for Akiyama. I thought, surely this will be a moral, upstanding character. Someone who will set a good example and will do some actual good in the world, unlike Kiryu, who just kind of goes and messes things up and then leaves town like a bitch. So Akiyama is a local who lends money, so I figured, well, at least he's a capitalist. But actually, no. He got all of his money after being a homeless bum, and then there was a big explosion on the Millennium Tower in one of the previous games, and a bunch of money fell down. He collected it all, and then he did some bets on horses or whatever, won even more money, and now he's just sitting on a massive pile of cash, lazing about, and lending money at his leisure. He's a communist because he does not charge interest. And he also doesn't do a lot of normal things that lenders do. So if you want to qualify for a loan from Akiyama, it's not about your credit history or your business plan. It's about you being able to do his challenges, and his challenges are about him making you live out his values, which is another communist thing that they like to do. Just like how communists like to teach critical race theory in schools and make kids live out the values and fantasies of the teachers and then go home and preach that to their parents, right? So that's kind of how this is working with Akiyama. So he likes to make young women act like whores and go to his cabaret club and seduce men. This is a way for him to vicariously experience what it's like to be desired by other men. It's kind of an odd thing because Akiyama is actually desired by women. He's considered to be a handsome, charming guy, but he can't really get into that because he himself is a homosexual who wants men to come on to him that way. So the reason he has this club is not only so he can send his money-lending people there to watch them learn to be whores, but also so that he can live vicariously and watch these men seduce these girls that he trained and watch his techniques work on men and get them all horny. Akiyama has a love interest in the story, a man named Arai, who is a Yakuza, and Akiyama gave him a bunch of money thinking that he's going to be a huge star in the Tojo Alliance. But in fact, Arai turns out to be a massive traitor, and Akiyama is genuinely heartbroken. You can tell that this is more than just a bad investment or a betrayal by a guy he thought was a friend. Akiyama also hangs out with Kido, who was an Arai friend as well, and Akiyama doesn't question why Kido keeps following him around. And he just assumes that Kido is gay for him and that Kido has a big crush on him because he thinks that that's a normal thing to assume for a man. Because he himself has a huge crush on Arai, and so he just thinks that there's sort of a failed love triangle going on where he's after Arai, Kido's after him, and he'll just use Kido in order to trail Arai and then blow him off later. As for how he gets away with all of this, he actually has a beard built in. He has a secretary named Hannah, and she's the only woman that he ever really talks to or talks about. And she basically serves as a beard. So a lot of people assume that he's not open about having a relationship with her because she's kind of fat. And in Japan, being fat is considered negative, unlike in the US. So, the reason why he uses Hannah as a beard is because he knows that everyone will just assume that they're together without asking, and so he doesn't really need to justify why he doesn't have other women. So the way that works is that people just assume he's a chubby chaser and don't ask, because no one wants to know about that. It's gross. And he gets away with pursuing men the way that he does, and with living vicariously through his strippers. The next person we play as is Taiga Saishima, someone who only now appears, although the game has been hinting about his existence for a while. I remember back in Yakuza 0, Goro Majima would actually say sometimes that certain people remind them of him, referring, of course, to Saishima. So he's been thinking about this man for many years. And that seems a bit unusual given that about 20 or so years passed between Yakuza 0 and the events of Yakuza 4. Actually, more than 20 years. Yet that whole time, Majima has been thinking about another man. Pretty sus. Also, Saishima has a sister who is someone that grew up with the two of them, and the game makes it clear she's an attractive woman. Yet, Majima, despite having this in with her, and despite knowing her for a long time, never makes a move on her. That's pretty weird. If he were straight, that is. Kind of hard to explain unless you assume that Majima likes dudes. And we know that he does from the previous games. His homosexuality is extraordinarily well documented in my previous videos. We also see that Majima and Saishima definitely have some sort of sexual tension between them, and the game basically has them go through what amounts to a wedding ceremony and then some post-marriage sex. Or you could call it make-up sex, depending on how you choose to look at it. So, when they're meeting together, Saishima is still on the run because he broke out of prison to be with Majima, and they're trying to get together, but instead of just meeting Saishima somewhere after sending him a disguise using his many thugs, Majima instead forces Saishima to go through a bunch of bullshit and fight all of his lackeys, and then he comes out of the elevator and greets him with his nicest suit on. So he makes Saishima prove his love for him and prove that he's the best man, and he also makes him compete for Majima's affection. Then Majima comes out dressed as dapper as he can, and then they do a grand procession with the Majima family lining the streets, and it looks like a wedding procession, where you got the bride and groom marching side by side, and then you have people lining the streets to congratulate them. Then they go to the batting center where they're left alone, and after hitting a few balls with bats, which are of course penis-shaped, the two men then take off their shirts and fight because of a minor misunderstanding. And then of course they're panting with their shirts off together and smoking, and just like that fight at the beginning of Yakuza 3, this is very much a coded gay sex scene. And if they were just going to fight, and these guys are really good at fighting and would give everybody an example of how to fight better, how to be a better man, you would think that Majima would want his men to watch this so that way they could see how a real man deals with Saishima. But instead, he kicks them all out because this wasn't really a fight. This is a metaphor for sex between two grown men. The third character is perhaps the most surprising and the most unusual of them all. Tanimura the Flea. This is basically a man who is a dirty cop. He is not Yakuza, however. What's weird about him is that he openly disobeys the law. So in Japan, you can only have so many immigrants. They actually have an immigration limit, unlike the US, where we have open borders. But there are men like Tanimura, whose nickname is the Flea, who does not enforce that kind of policy and also does his best to get fake papers for Chinese people. So his loyalty is to China. He's probably a Chinese agent, possibly even a traitor to Japan. We don't really establish that for sure. But he's known to be crooked by all of his fellow officers, and they call him the Flea, both because he's annoying and because he runs away from trouble, as evidenced by the fact that he ran from Kiryu before fighting him. He also makes an alliance with Akiyama when he interviews him. He realizes that Akiyama, while he's somewhat seedy, is not dangerous or a murderer, so he decides to work with Akiyama to try to do his investigation. Well, it's clear from the way that they interact that Akiyama is very attracted to Tanimura. Tanimura kind of has like a twink thing going on, And he looks like one of those guys who would work in those clubs like Starlight, where men go and flirt with women, and women come and pay them, kind of like a hostess club, but with guys. So Tanimura has that going on, and Akiyama, as we know, is a homosexual, so he has his own reasons for wanting to hang out with this cop. Otherwise, it'd be weird for a shady moneylender who's a communist and then a cop to hang out. We have to remember, you got a communist moneylender, you got a guy who seems to be loyal to China, China's communist. They might have other connections we don't really know about. And we know from Yakuza 3 that the involvement of, say, the Japanese government and the CIA is possible in this universe. So, what I'm saying is that there's a very good chance that Tanimura and Akiyama, one or both, are Chinese agents of some kind, and this is just something that the story hints at but never actually gets into. And again, while Akiyama has an attraction to Tanimura, Tanimura is not necessarily gay. In fact, he does not seem like a homosexual, but it is very possible, so we can't rule that out definitively. The fourth and final character we play as in Yakuza 4 is Kiryu, the primary star of the entire series. By this point, we know that Kiryu is a watery, bisexual, very flaky individual who follows his passions, whatever they might be, and they tend to vary quite a bit. Kiryu has had sexual relations with both men and women across the course of the series. He can't decide whether he wants to be in the Tojo Alliance or not. He can't decide whether he wants to live in Tokyo or not. He just bounces all over the place. He's kind of this guy who doesn't really know who he is and has identity issues, yet he is a beastly-ass fighter, so he keeps being able to get away with making bad decisions, and no one can really hold him to account for those. Well, let's talk about his decisions and choices here. So he's still in Okinawa running his orphanage. And he's still single. Now, this seems a little odd, right? Because we know in the last game he had a boyfriend, Rakia. They were kind of on the DL. So he's probably now giving the D to Mikio, the other member of that family, either that or the old man who ran the family. But that can't satisfy a guy like Kiryu. Kiryu has a certain type. He's not into dudes who look like Mikio, who is fat. So unlike Akiyama, Kiryu would not want anyone suspecting that he's a chubby chaser because, again, Kiryu's like this really buff dude who likes to beat the shit out of people. So, Kiryu's kind of bored, even though he does enjoy raising his kids. And we also know that he doesn't have a girlfriend despite being there for a few years, being on a beach where he can show off his physique and supposedly being irresistible to women, all that. So he must have chosen not to have a girlfriend. You'd also think it'd be easy to pick up women if you can pose as this really like Mother Teresa-like guy who is raising all these kids out of the kindness of his heart, and like somebody would feel bad for them and feel like they need to service Kiryu in order to keep him going with his job. So I mean, he really should be able to pick up some women pretty easily, and he's not. It's weird. So he's getting a little bored. There aren't that many good men around, and he's not really willing to take up a beard. He's still claiming that he's hurt over his last girlfriend becoming Korean and going to America. So he bonds with Saishima after Saishima escapes from prison. Saishima lands on his beach, and on the beach they have a fist fight, which has kind of a sex-like quality to it, similar to the fight that Kiryu had against Majima at the very beginning of Yakuza 3, and similar to the fight that Saishima will have against Majima at the batting center. So the two of them have this fight, and then they become really good friends. And apparently Kiryu enjoyed this fight/beach sex enough that when another man washes up on the beach and claims that he is a blood brother of Saishima, it turns out that this is none other than Kiryu's old enemy, Go Hamazaki. They had a lot of beef in Yakuza 3, yet Kiryu, because they have this common lover, Saishima, is willing to work with Hamazaki despite the fact he shouldn't, and together they try to find Saishima's sister. And once they find Saishima's sister, Just like Majima, Kiryu shows no real interest and does not make any moves on her, despite the fact that she is clearly attractive and available. So again, pretty sus. Also, you know who else doesn't make any moves on her or show interest? Akiyama. Forgot to mention that earlier, but there you go. And then there's Tanimura. He sort of seems like he thinks, yeah, she's pretty cute, but that's about it, because Tanimura is the flea. He can't really be a man and just ask her to drop her pants for some sweet romance. So he just stands there like an idiot and sort of looks at her like, damn, she's cute. And that's about all he's got. That's about the extent of his game. I mean, maybe if he's working at Starlight as a little twink host, maybe he should come in and give him some money and then let him feel her boob or whatever. But, you know, that's not what's happening here. And then once he gets to Tokyo, once he goes back to where he should have been the whole damn time, Kiryu has suspicious interactions with Daigo. There's always been a little bit of pederasty there where he knew Daigo as a kid and they kind of have this like attraction to each other, especially Daigo to Kiryu. It gets really weird, and I've actually played some of Yakuza 5 now, so I've seen that again, and there's a lot of gay stuff going on there. Kiryu, of course, has his fight with Saishima, then they become kind of like exes who are still close in terms of how they act around each other. And then he also has sort of a meeting of the exes with Majima when Majima's getting arrested, and they sort of had this interaction that only makes sense if they are very close, if they have sort of a shared secret, and if Majima is really surprised to see him back. But yeah, it's also awkward between Kiryu and Majima because they also both know Saishima now, although I don't think Majima knows that Kiryu and Saishima have already done some stuff. So yeah, this whole thing gets really complicated, but the point is that 3 out of the 4 major characters are homosexuals. One of them is a communist. One of them, or possibly 2 of them, are Chinese agents. So yeah, this is not a good moral example for kids, and Sega once again has produced degenerate content of the highest order. So I highly recommend not playing this game, not purchasing this game, and just playing other things that are more morally uplifting. Next time I will provide my analysis of Yakuza 5, then we'll move on to 6, then we'll look at Like a Dragon. Until next time, I'm Remarkable Republican, bringing you the truth with a truth-flavored bias. Signing out.